Mike, I know my sample size is small between you and Angus Ross, but it seems like everyone in New Zealand I've met kind of who coaches also lives on a farm or in the middle of like nature or something. I'm jealous. I'm truly jealous living here in Ohio. So I'm you guys definitely have that like full spectrum of both training and nature for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a pretty special place to live. It's a very cool, sort of live in the middle of nowhere and train in the middle of nowhere and, you know, surrounded by rivers and beaches and yeah, it's neat.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of Rocky style training opportunities in its own way. You know, we work hard to find them here in the central United States. I'm sure they're just it. I know back when I was in California, there was always mountains. If you have a mountain or like a river or an ocean or a body of water, there's just something special about that. So yeah, definitely jealous of you guys over there, without question. Um, so I want to get into your background a little bit. I know you've done a lot of research on like tendons and connective tissue and elasticity in training. Tell me a little bit about what sparked your interest in those topics, and then also how you got into the world of track and field.
Yeah. So I suppose the world of track and field probably sparked my interest in that. So I was originally a golfer, and just didn't hit it far enough to be fair. I was sort of I'm not very tall, so I'm 5'7", 5'7", 5'10", somewhere around there. So I'm um pretty small, and I had to retire from golf because couldn't make money, and so I sort of pursued this hit it far route, like how do I hit it far, and that led me to weightlifting, and ultimately started working with people and Olympic weightlifting. Um, and then I started working with a whole lot of golfers because I sort of thought that getting strong and powerful was the way to hit it far, and it it didn't eventuate that way. And then I started working with throwers and doing the S&C side initially, and that was pretty good. And so obviously in the rotational world, sort of this kind of I suppose fascia is the term, but it's more kind of this linking of segments in the body. Um, that's a really big thing, and that led us down this kind of connective tissue fascia route, and then along with Angus Ross, who obviously you know as well. Um, he he got me into the PhD route where we sort of thought, well, let's try and figure out why people throw far and how they throw far and what we can do about that in a training sense. Uh, so combined with kind of the contractile side and the fascial side, or tendinous fascia, we started kind of trying to piece together actually physiologically how does someone throw far. And one of those components is obviously the connective tissue that links the musculature and links segments. And so we got really interested in that. And that was originally my PhD was meant to be a part of that. And so the track and field route, so I sort of started as an S&C. And then I had a hammer thrower, Nicole Bradley, who asked me if I'd coach her and do everything. And I was sort of like, well, I was sort of in my golf weightlifting world and actually didn't know what hammer was. And this has been kind of 2014, 2015. And I was like, well, yeah, well, I mean, we'll see how we go. I can learn. And her premise was, you either coach me or I'll quit. And I was like, well, I think you're too good to quit. So I'll have a crack at this thing. And then that led me down to a whole lot of other people coming to me to coach and for the sort of full service coaching, S&C, biomechanics. And so I ended up with a squad of 7 or 8, 3 or 4 years later. And I've been fortunate to coach a few people to world champs and Olympic levels, an Olympic medal in there. And it's been a bit of a journey and a bit of a whirlwind. But that's kind of how it all kind of pieced together. It was more solving puzzles, I suppose, is probably how I would look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think golf is such a perfect start with that in the sense of there's other, of course, just like raw speed or more pure track and field events. There's certainly people who are extremely elastic. They're not as strong as their competitors and they can still run fast and jump high. But golf, I feel like it's even more so because it's just so rotational. I know for me, I'm playing disc golf, similar. It's almost like the opposite way you swing, like a backwards way. I remember when I was about 23, I read some Charlie Francis material on how if you don't take a break after 7 years of hard training, it's hard to keep going up or something. And I was thinking to myself, I should probably take a break. I've trained really hard for a long time. And just because I love training as well. And I remember taking about 2 or 3 months completely off, nothing, no weightlifting, no sprinting, no plyos. But I couldn't sit still. So I would just go play disc golf all the time. And what was interesting is my throwing just kept getting farther and farther and farther. And I mean, I was really launching it out there. But when I went back to train again, the first day I tested my vertical, it was terrible. I mean, it was like probably down about the running 2-foot jump was down about 6 inches at least. It may have been a bit more. And it quickly came back. But it was just so interesting how that specificity of the rotation and kind of that high velocity, lower pure force requirement made that happen. And periodically I'll watch videos of throws, like either ultimate frisbee. I work with athletes who do ultimate. And for the sake of helping the pulls and just thinking about the weight room. And I see some of the guys who are throwing the farthest, and these are guys who they look like they've never touched a weight, some of them. I mean, and they're also very narrow ISA rib cages, like very, very narrow types. And of course, there's people who throw very far who do lift and are very strong, certainly. But some of these guys are throwing like over 600 feet, the disc. And I'm like, it just fascinates me how their skeleton and connective tissue is working with that strategy. And I wanted to ask you, Mike, so when we talk about the role of connective tissue and throwing or sprinting and jumping or whatever athletic movement it is, I think people like to start with the binary. It's like either you're muscle driven or you're fascia driven. You're like, one or the other. Obviously, it's more complex than that. So where do you start? Let's just say those athletes who maybe it's golf where their max strength requirement is not necessarily as high, or it's sprinting or jumping, or even the throws in track and field. What are some things you feel are contributing with athletes who can perform very well but have those lower maximal strength levels?
Yeah, I suppose that the term sort of fascia is an in vogue thing, isn't it? And so it's a really complex puzzle because you have some complex biomechanics in there. So if you take someone in, let's say for you guys it's NFL, for us it's rugby, and in kicking. So the swinging action of the kicking foot is derived from what we call induced acceleration. So the knee is extended by the hip flexion, and how that kind of works is if you're bench pressing, and so if you're above 90 degrees or sort of above parallel with your humerus, the pec will abduct the humerus, and that will extend the elbow because the hand is connected to the bar. And so you can have probably, and then don't try this anyone, but you can have a severed tricep and still be able to do a partial bench press because it becomes a shoulder adduction action, and the shoulder adduction extends the hip. And so there's this induced acceleration phenomena that basically propels the free leg in kicking. And that is derived from sort of a complex sequence of muscle timings. And so a lot of people that are weak just don't get in their own way. And so they don't have sort of co-contraction, and they allow the free leg to swing. And so there's also some really nice work in kind of cyclic movements where the deactivation time, or the time that you switch the muscle off, is the time that controls the power output of the next step. Um, so so while there's this kind of fascial thing that people do, there's also some really complex physiology and complex timings and complex biomechanics that sort of sit in behind that. So to call someone a fascial mover versus a pusher, it's kind of these crude categories of probably people that rhythm and sequence things really well, and they're flowing and fluid, versus someone who sort of bashes it, you know.
Sure.
And so some of these really weak guys, they allow tissues to stretch. So they in the throwing world, in like the discus or shot put world, they allow the torso to rotate ahead of the implement, and that creates this really nice long stretch. And then we know that tissue or tendinous tissue in particular, will return that energy, and they allow that energy to be returned. And you hear these kind of sayings where people go, "It felt easy," or like those kind of things. And so I'm not sure if it's this kind of these fascially driven people. And that's my bias. I suppose I don't look at it that way as well. I kind of think, well, maybe they're really good at timing the neural elements to allow things to stiffen and pop, and they can do that through a segment. Because I've had some people through my sort of career that have bounced really well, or have been what you would describe as kind of a fascial thrower, that have like a 20 centimeter vertical jump and a 1.0 RSI, and they move and flow really well. The other part there is part of my PhD was looking at can you measure and map this kind of musculoarticular stiffness? So we tried to map this kind of musculoarticular stiffness, and musculoarticular stiffness is stiffness of all the elastic tissues that cross the joint. And basically what you do is you get someone to hold weights, and you protrude the bar or protrude them, and they should bounce. So these elastic tissues should store and return energy, kind of like if you drop something on the end of a rubber band, it'll kind of bounce. And what we found is that you kind of can't do it. And so there's just too much deformation and other stuff, or some structures really dampen that bounce. And so one of the things we found is in a squat, if you protrude the bar, the oscillation that occurs at the bar isn't seen in a force plate. So the spine, one of the sort of intervertebral discs' biggest gifts is probably to dampen some of those oscillations. And so we sort of found that these elastic tissues within patterns are very, very difficult to categorize across people, and they're very difficult to see, to measure. And so some of my bias around, like, maybe it's something else that's going on, is to do with the fact that we couldn't see this kind of linking of segments. And kind of like your frisbee golf stuff, we got really down this route years ago, myself and Gus, to the point where we built a machine to train the functional back line, so the right glute, left lat connection. We here at High Performance Sport, we had them invest a fair whack of money into making these bespoke machines, and we designed them and used them for a long period of time. And with the inclusion of them, we didn't see an appreciable change in some of these kind of fascial linking, and these are in high level throwers. So we sort of, I suppose, I sort of think that it's probably far more complex than fascial and muscular, is it? It might be the muscular driven guy that looks like a fascial guy because he's really good at switching on and off.
Mm-hmm.
And he can time everything to perfection, and he looks like this guy. And you might have the fascial guy that he is the guy that bounces well because he's got no option. But I don't know.
Athletic performance is built on a spectrum of training methods, from high velocity skills to power training to strength work. And on one end of that spectrum, on that strength end, you have the most targeted work in the form of machines. And this is part of the reason that so many top speed and strength coaches have their favorite machines to deliver that targeted stimulus. For decades, Hammer Strength has been a top provider of reliable, effective machines that are trusted by coaches and athletes worldwide. They fit seamlessly into that total performance program, delivering that targeted strength stimulus. When it comes to your machine-based strength training needs, think Hammer Strength. Yeah, I think about that too, because one of the things I've thought, and I do, the word fascial driven is very appealing because I think it gives a message of elasticity. But I would think, okay, well, even the muscular athlete, do they not use their fascia? Of course they do, right? Like, how do you not? But it's more, I like what you say about not getting in your own way. To me, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, how do you select a word that would exemplify that? And I remember one of the studies that I had gone through when I was writing my book, Speed Strength, it was not a human-based study. It was a computer modeling study of sprinting. And this is, again, to your point of, well, what is it, right? Because if you have to resort to computer models sometimes, I think you almost do from a very general perspective, but it was saying that human speed capability is it is much higher if we actually take the muscles out, but I don't know where you're getting propulsion in this study. But if it's just pure joints and elasticity, you have such a high limit to how fast you can move. But then I don't know how you get away from propulsion and muscle movement. I really don't know, but definitely it makes me think as well about what the body does, how the body solves problems. And it makes me think about James Wild, who's been on this podcast a few times. He's a sprint coach and researcher and has really cool models when it comes to sprinting. And a long time ago, he was talking about how athletes who were more hip dominant, who had stronger hips and propulsion, their feet and ankle strength tested weaker. And if they had really strong feet and ankles, their hips may register weaker on some of these isometric tests. And it would strike me that, okay, if you don't have the muscular power, now you problem solve by finding another way to be fast or explosive or powerful. And there was this little anecdote, and I don't know if it was in the actual DB Hammer book. And now I'm getting away from scientific peer reviewed and into just weird land. But there was a book going around in the 2010s. This pseudonym DB Hammer wrote this, and there were some emails that he wrote to like Chris Corfist and Dan Fichter, and he had a website. And one of the methods was like icing your calves before you do jumping. And I assume it's actually for that reason. I think it was for that reason of, okay, well, your muscles are not going to work very well. So how do you now do this? And of course, it's a complex solution or problem to solve. It's not like, okay, all fascia now, nothing else. Like there's got to be a lot of processes going on. But those types of things intrigue me. Or pre-fatiguing. Obviously, fatigue. Yeah, we don't want to be slow twitch if we're trying to be explosive, but it's interesting to see how the body solves a problem in real time. If you just burnt out your calves on a calf raise and now you go try to do pogos or something, now where's the power coming from and that kind of thing. So I'm super interested in it, but I, like yourself, I don't know what the exact thing is. It's just you have to move exceedingly well for sure.
Yeah, and it's quite an interesting thing. Especially in rotation, because that kind of functional backline is so prominent, and like ultimate frisbee is the ultimate sort of functional backline loaded skill where you kind of you cross your body so the lats on stretch, and then you drive from the trail leg, which will probably be the right side if you're holding in your left hand, and you create this big stretch and this kind of whip and you whip the kind of frisbee, and but that kind of that functional backline is a lattice type thing, and so both the left and right lat connect into that, and so while you're stretching the right to left connection, you're probably also stretching the left to right connection, and because of the way the kind of fascia probably lies there. The other part of that is it assumes that these tissues can glide under one another, and like an Achilles tendon can probably glide, and then part of that stiffness from icing might be just the temperature of the tissue being colder, being stiffer as it's colder. But that sort of fascial line in the back is really complex, and I don't know sort of where I'm going with that, but I just think that it's probably far more complex, and it's very hard to differentiate people. And you get these motor morons that are super stiff, that really can't sequence things or move, but they're probably really bound up. They just don't have the motor coordination to bounce. And so I haven't viewed anything that way in terms of the muscular driven, fascial driven, and I probably think that some of the non-fascial people, they're the motor morons, what you describe as a motor moron. It's like an all or nothing thing where everything gets switched on, and it's like a chainsaw going, and nothing really happens, and it just kind of, they can't bounce along and switch on and off. But that said, there is this kind of need to link segments and movements, and whether that's structurally linked, I don't know, or whether that's linked in just in a sequence where people can kind of turn on and off and strike the ground with the right musculature on, and then as soon as the strike's over, they can switch it off again and get into the next cycle.
Yeah. A lot of this makes me think about the idea of when do we introduce weights to athletes, just because I don't know what it's like in New Zealand, but here in the United States, a lot of kids start lifting very early. And I think it's good for athletes to be strong, but there is that question of, well, if we're talking about highest ceiling you can achieve, such as your peak is in your late 20s, which most athletes here are not going to peak in their late 20s. Most are just hoping to get a college scholarship, and I think that's part of that they'll start strength training and whatnot earlier. But I think about Stefan Holm, who didn't start lifting until he was, I think, 19 or 20, like serious strength training, and then peaked, I think, about age 27 or something like that. And the idea of you have the constraint for an extended period of time of needing to be as fast and powerful as possible without the luxury of more muscular power, and to become a better problem solver under that realm. To me, it's interesting. I don't know if I have the best answer or not, but I think that there is something to be said about that. And I think about you go ahead.
Sorry, and people, when they get strong early, they fire their best bullet. Like humans are a species of firing your best bullet, and if strength is your best bullet, then sequence won't be something that you probably try and fire. And we get this in the throwing world a lot, where you get the really trained out of sequence person, and you get the untrained in sequence person.
Mm-hmm.
And so you almost learn to move, or you learn to bash it. And I think there's something to be said about learning weak, like learn the skill weak, and because strength is easy, but skill is hard.
Yeah. I know in the basketball, like slam dunk community, people who do like between the legs, 360s and stuff. I feel like it's becoming a little bit maybe more of a thing where if you grow up and you just practice all that, you play basketball and you just practice as many dunks as you can, And then when you're older, you start strength training. And it's those people like I know Jordan Kilganone, I know he was like this. He dunked every day for years until maybe he was 18. He started lifting seriously. It wasn't until later. And then it just compounded itself. And coaches will say that athletes who have that great base of movement and then you give them weightlifting, they're going to do great. Like they're going to take that movement base and they can use it really well. But if you don't have that, and you start lifting, I mean, you'll get some results, but you're still not moving well. And I think that's the thing a lot of people don't see. And then, well, the question is if you're not a great mover, is it possible, and you missed it, you're like 15 and you walk into the training facility and you're not a good mover, how much, I believe you can get some back, but how much can you get back versus a child who ran and did everything and like from a learning perspective? And I think it's definitely an important thing, to regain that ability as much as you can if you don't have it. And that's what excites me about training as well, because that's a lot harder than just getting stronger. That's a lot more involved.
Yeah, I think at that age, people don't like to see the movement exploration stuff come in. There's also a bias there, but so in my experience, you can change a 26-year-old and you can change a 12-year-old, and you can create a mover out of a 26-year-old. They might not be as good as the 12-year-old ever, but they'll get pretty close. And you've got to commit to the path. I think as we get older, we commit to this like structure, and I think committing to that structure, or the like, you've got to hit these numbers to do this. Committing to those structures, people see the movement exploration stuff as being less valuable because it doesn't fit to the metric, right? Like you've got to bench 200 versus you've got to be able to do a roly-poly into a handstand. This doesn't have value. The roly-poly into a handstand doesn't have value at that age, but the bench 200 has, in people's mind, a statistical weight. But you've got to give people what they need, I think. So if they're the 26-year-old that can't move, hey, the roly-poly into the handstand is probably the right route. If they are the person who can move, then the bench 200 route might be the go, while you maintain the roly-poly into the handstand. But we've sort of had success with making movers out of people that maybe they weren't as good a mover, or they needed to shift their movement skill. And so in a coaching realm, part of that is to do with how you learn. So you kind of draw on prior experience, and you use prior experience to solve current problems. And so in throwing, with sort of roughly like to allow people to understand it, it's just a motor vocabulary. And if you compare a motor vocabulary, or that's analogous to a vocabulary, and the performance is the essay, then you've got your vocab's got to be good enough to answer the essay. And so the motor vocab has to be good enough for you to answer the kind of performance solution. And so we've had 6'10" throwers doing handstands and roly-polies, and doing all these rolling patterns on the ground. Like elite shot putters do the same thing, where they would be climbing stuff and trying to make it between bars and all sorts of stuff, just to try and shift their movement vocabulary so that they can leverage that or learn from that when they do their technical skill. And they sort of we call that sort of that transition between motor vocab and skill, this kind of co-action. So do they have the vocab to answer the problem they're trying to answer? Just a little bit of a side note about how we sort of view that.
Yeah, there's almost this web of those related movements that I think could be associated for each skill. Like, for example, that backwards roly-poly, which is an amazing movement. I remember making most athletes, between the aquatic athletes and tennis players at Cal, do at least backwards rolls. So you have your forwards roll, like head underneath, shoulder roll, and then backwards. And I mean, some athletes were amazing at it, and some athletes were really, really bad. And I think about if people have seen those Soviet, like old school training videos for pole vaulters, Bubka, I'm sure Sergei Bubka and all that, he's doing that backwards roll and then pressing up into a handstand. And I remember seeing the pole vaulters do it when I was in college, and I learned to do that. I could do that without too much extra work. And I was thinking about how does the literacy relate to the tree? I have an interesting example with that in terms of javelin. I took about an 11-year hiatus from throwing javelin. I had last thrown at age 28, and then I just bought one again a couple of years ago, And it's interesting because in that 11-year hiatus, one thing that happened to me was I got a lot more compressed in my upper body from just a lot of pressing, a lot of overhead pressing. I lost shoulder range of motion values. And when I started throwing again, I was able to retain a lot of the feeling that I used to have, but my distances were a lot less, just a lot more stiffness in the neck and shoulders. But I found one day, one thing that I used to be able to do that I lost the ability to do, a movement, kind of in the Ido Portal world, I guess you could say, that related to javelin in a way you wouldn't think was when I was in high school, I started doing some breakdance moves just because I thought it was cool. And there was this old VHS tape I bought and just tried to do whatever move. It was all the power moves. I had no style. I just wanted to do the fancy power moves. And I could do this thing called a single leg swipe, and it's very hard to describe. I don't even know how I'm going to describe it on audio. It's almost like if you ever seen, if anyone has seen Tim Anderson do an air roll, basically you have your hands on the ground and your feet kind of do a 360 in the air, and then you launch off your hands and land again. I can't describe it, but it's a spinning motion, aerial spinning motion that's ground-based that you have to have a lot of hip-shoulder separation, and you also have to have some guts, because you could bail and hurt yourself. And I remember self-learning that movement in high school. And long story short, as I was trying it, I got it in my head at a javelin. I was just throwing javelin around. I was like, I wonder if I could do that again. And I knew I couldn't. I should say I knew I couldn't do that anymore because when I tried to start doing that skill again at age 37 or 38, I couldn't do it. And I remember supersetting javelin with that skill, that single leg swipe. And even though I still couldn't get it, just practicing that single leg swipe and then going to throw javelin, I felt like I had something extra out of my system. Like I was like, ooh, that was something that back when I could do it. Because I remember the first time I picked up a javelin and threw it with no experience, I threw it pretty far. And there was a lot of things that went into that. I played a lot of dodgeball when I was a kid and baseball before that, of course. But I think that some of those other movements fit on that tree. But of course, I think like rock climbing probably hurt my javelin throwing actually, because it's like so much compression through the shoulders and probably making my forearms too big and my grip too rigid. Like that was like a negative movement library for specializing in the javelin. But breakdancing was really good. So anyways, I like, I think I like that you mentioned like the window, like here's all the movements that really help this thing. And that's something, those Liz Gleedle, javelin thrower, calls them like a side quest. Here's all these side quests you can go on.
Yeah. Yeah.
It can help you.
And they're a thing, like you don't know what movement someone's going to kind of link the movement that you want them to do too. So like you and I might link, let's say javelin, we might link it to a pullover in the gym. Mm-hmm. But a kid might link that to like an overhead serve in volleyball.
Yeah.
And allowing them to understand or draw on that. And you'll get people go, oh, this is like this. And or what you want me to do is like this movement, isn't it? And that movement vocabulary is giving them the options of this is like. And that allows you to have those conversations and change the skill ultimately.
Yeah. I think about Rafe Kelly has talked about training at the highest possible level of complexity, and that kind of bringing up a lot of the other ships. Like we talk about strength as the tide that raises all ships. In some ways, I think foremost before that's related skills are the tide. And then the
Yeah.
strength is the bonus. That's the booster. And for me with the javelin, in the body I was in at age 38 or 39 when I started it again, the skill is the thing that I needed by far, because I could have gone and done the pullovers, but I was already really rigid through my shoulders. And yes, there's going to be some lengthening, but it's almost more like an orienting, like it's kind of like you're taking something that's compressed and then you're stretching the compressed thing. And by doing some of those spinning motions, I think I was able to regain a little bit more of just the underlying movement and not just the strength on top of it type thing. I'm sure the pullovers would have helped, but if I could get that movement ability that I had in my 20s type thing, and even it makes me think about, there's a really cool video of, there was all these, it was like Team Flight Brothers or Slam Nation, like one of those traveling dunk crews. And after the show, these guys are busting off like back handsprings. One guy does a back handspring and then a half twist in the air, and I'm sure self-taught too, which is just blew my mind. And
Incredible way.
yeah, and these guys, I'm sure they're naturally strong, but I don't think any of them really lifted seriously. Again, I'm sure they have the natural power, but it's just, to me, that blew my mind, because that is not what if you talk about training, you don't think that,
Yeah. It's a bit like kind of a side note, right? And people don't take people there, but maybe if you took someone there, maybe that'd be better. I don't know. And so I've started here with a discus thrower he's 30 years old, just started discus. He's a 210 high jumper and a 780 long jumper who wants to give discus a go. And so we just started with like medicine ball throws. Like part of his gym stuff is a medicine ball throw, really low intensity, just for rhythm, to start to understand sequence, like a lower body turn, then the upper body turns, and just like differentiating the upper and lower segments. And because he doesn't have those aren't part of his vocab. He's always been in sort of in a straight line. And and then a couple of weeks ago, he was sort of like, well, like, I get it now. I couldn't do it, but I get it. I can understand where this fits. It's kind of like this. And so you're always sort of trying to give them the experience to leverage to learn from.
Yeah. I always like those. That reminds me of the former Russian high jumper, Ivan Ukov, but he was in reverse. He was the guy who was famous for, he showed up at a Diamond League meet drunk and like kind of jogged up to the bar and he dove under it. That's what he's well known for, but that guy was a beast. I mean, I'm sure there was probably some level of performance enhancing substances in there, but I mean, the guy is still like, you watch him jump and he's like kind of a little bit this tall, goofy guy, but a guy who was a good discus thrower and then became a high jumper. And I think about, how does that transition happen? But you could see that whippiness show up in his jump, and he was a strong guy. Like, he got a lot of knee bend, and yeah, it's always interesting how those crossovers happen, and the movement first and foremost there. Mike, before I get carried away, I wanted to say something with the fascial lines, because I wanted to touch on that, and you got me thinking about, and it was something we said before. I think we even pushed record for this podcast, but the idea of, well, how many of those fascial lines really exist? When we train functionally, like cross body, and we're going to hit the chain, is that really a thing? And you were saying with the disc throw, like the frisbee golf or disc golf, you can make a lot of disc golfers upset if you call it frisbee golf. I can call it frisbee. But you're right. Like, that's, to me, it seems like, I think you had said that the one main chain we do know is that thoracolumbar, like the glute to the contralateral or the opposite lat, like that's definitely a thing. And I was thinking, oh yeah, well, I'm definitely getting that when I throw. But what about the other ones? And what about training? Is that something that we can train? All these in the Robert Schlepp's book, the fascial book, with all the lines, the superficial front and the oblique sling and all that. Can we train it? And what are your thoughts there?
I think, can we train it? And this is the beauty of fascial training, is that we don't know. Like, statistically, we don't know if we can train it. So it's easy to say we train it, because you can't. If I say I train fascial frames, no one can go, no, you don't. But so I suppose that if we if we kind of look at kind of the literature and you kind of draw on the literature, to change tendon tissue, you need strain. And so in our world, strain is probably load and contraction. Like if it's isometric, it needs high levels of contraction. And so a lot of what is termed modern day fascial training, I suppose, is there's almost relatively unloaded or submaximal loads through these chains and or through these movements. And so the question is there enough strain to induce fascial change? And I don't know, like if you have a guy that benches 200 and he's doing some sort of complex cable movement with 20, is that enough strain through that tissue to induce fascial change? My gut feel would probably be no, but maybe it's certainly enough movement complexity to change the movement capability. And so coming back to our original kind of linking segments and switching on off sequences, waiting for certain segments to finish their job before the next segment goes. So maybe it's enough there. When you look at the literature, they sort of looked for these fascial chains in the fascial literature, and they found kind of one or two that are very, very likely to exist in almost everyone. And one of the key ones was that functional backline, so the lat to glute connection. That was pretty well known, and there was another paper that showed if you snip the glute tendon and you snip the lat tendon and you pull the glute tendon, the lat tendon moves. So there's sort of some evidence that it really does exist. And then if you look at nature, and this is totally a side note, and so years ago I do a bit of hunting. It's kind of common here in New Zealand, and apologies for those that don't or don't agree with it. So, but I shot 2 deer. I shot a hind and a yearling. So basically, a hind is the mum, and the yearling is a younger offspring. And if animal or deer at that age live with their mum, and so they follow them around everywhere, and they have the same the same behaviors. And when we skin them, and if you see Angus have a presentation that has this photo in it, and so when we took all the skin off, what you see is this white dense connective tissue on the mum, and just muscular tissue on the yearling, so almost no connective tissue development. And so these kind of prolonged strain patterns are probably needed to develop fascia over time. And we know we need a lot of strain for a long period of time, because tendon doesn't tend to adapt that fast. And especially when we're talking about linking segments, we're talking about probably the addition of collagen. And we know that like tendon doesn't grow very fast. And so the addition of collagen doesn't happen very fast. So can you train it? Like maybe not. The one of the reasons we built a machine was because we wanted to strain the pattern and really isolate and strain that structure. So this machine was kind of like a reverse hyper with a rotational row type thing, where you could literally load up as heavy as possible and you could strain these patterns. You could put people in there and do these long isometrics. And so we could probably get enough strain to adapt the tissues. But did we adapt the tissues? Like, we really have no idea. And I'd love to see some further exploration in this to see whether, like, training some of these movement patterns in these more complex, I suppose, movements changes fascial structure. And you'll get N equals 1 kind of MRI studies showing some unique fascial change, but we don't know how they got there as well a lot of the time. Like no one's going to go and hack up an NFL wide receiver to find out whether they're
Yeah.
their fascia is changing. So, I don't know, but I think from my lens, the what we were talking about before about the movement vocab switching on and off, like even if you don't adapt fascia, that stuff is still valuable.
Yeah.
And so maybe it forms this kind of motor vocabulary type thing. I'm uncertain and unsure whether like fascia will change and grow and adapt and all these beautiful things that we're after. And I'm unsure if a lot of the stuff that's touted as fascially biased, fascially dominant training can induce enough load to strain the tissues. Like, for example, I had a shot putter that we sort of think that he probably needed a bit more of that kind of pattern-based training, and more sequence and movement capacity. And so if you were to profile him, he would sit in the pusher. He's the contractile guy. He back squats 350. He benches 250, trap bars like 430, and power cleans 210. And he's got his standing jump and his counter movement jump are almost the same thing. And so we were like, well, he needs to be able to use some of these elastic tissues. And but doing some sort of like cable, landmine, whatever it is, at 40 or 50 kilos probably isn't going to strain his tissue enough in a chain, right? Because he can back squat 350. Like, and so are you going to induce strain that's above that to develop the chain? I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe, but I couldn't stand there and say this is for this. For us, it was like he needs to figure out how to develop a sequence. So if it's a putting motion, he needs to be able to sort of differentiate and separate the upper and lower, and then kind of create some separation between the chest and throwing arm, and then hit the ball. And so we're going to use it for that.
Yeah. A lot of the things that we would call fascial type training now, I feel have been around for a long time. I was just watching, and it's not that old. It was a Vern Gambetta training. It was for throwers, actually. And he has a similar one with a group of fitness professionals. And this was like 10, 15 years ago, I think he gave this. And maybe even more. I'm sure he was doing it 20 plus. And it's a lot of like cross body, like you have a medicine ball and you're walking and you're doing figure eights with the medicine ball, and it's cross body with the gait pattern. So you're getting, diagonal and rotational, and you could easily call that fascial. I'm sure it involves the fascial system, but he just called it functional training. And so it's movement training, and there's a lot of different things that are involved with that for sure. But I did find it interesting, with you with the superficial back line versus, well, do the other lines, do they even exist in other people? I do find it interesting with you said if you snip those tendons, you still get a pull through the fascial line in the back, which I do find interesting, because I know like strength coaches like Joe DeFranco have talked about when athletes pull-ups go up, a lot of times he sees a speed increase. And that would make sense if there's a force transmission through that area and you have a mutual thing going. I've seen that with a lot of good sprinters too, where they're not overly muscular. It was actually, I was watching Karsten Warholm, the 400 hurdler, finish the race. And if you wanted to call someone a fascial athlete, that is the dude. That is the dude. And he's got pretty, like his lats aren't huge like a bodybuilder, but you can see them like they're pretty strong. And it's just, you wonder, where exactly are you getting the force and the ability to maintain it from? And
you see that in boxing too. Like you see these boxers with huge backs and like really well developed lats, and it's the group that pulls the limb back, but it's sort of like they create these long stretches, and that kind of line snaps the hand back. And part of that might be good brakes, good accelerator. You got to brake to have a good accelerator, and that line might help with that. But there's certainly, you see a lot of people with really strong chin-ups, really strong like rowing motions for no other reason than that maybe they have that line and that kind of fascial chain in tune. Golfers are the same. Chin-up is a really high correlative club head speed. And so when you get to the top of the backswing, you've got the lead arm is on stretch, or that lead lat's on stretch, and you've coiled into that trail glute. So you've created a nice long line there. Maybe that's why I'm not sure if you've ever followed long drive, but back in maybe kind of early 2000s, there was two guys, Jamie Sadlowski, and what was his name? I've gone blank. But they were two opposites. So Jamie Sadlowski was an ice skating background, and sort of ice skating has that nice kind of opposing oscillation of segments. And then there was this like just giant beast of a man, like jacked. And Jamie Sadlowski was all of maybe 80 kilos, 70 kilos. And the other dude was just like muscular, huge musculature. And they were both at kind of 150 mile per hour. And two really different strategies. One might have been this kind of sinewy ice skater type guy that could stretch this functional backline. But that said, like it just fits with a nice bias, doesn't it?
Yes.
Like you look at them and you go, that fits with the bias. But like, and funnily enough, you see a lot of really good rotational people in ice skating. So Daniel Stahl, the I think he's 6'10". He's a huge Swedish discus thrower. He's thrown 70 meters multiple times. He can ice skate. Like it's a real thing of beauty. And so maybe some of that's that kind of sequencing of kind of opposing segments that maybe that drives some of that. Like that's probably the most known fascial chain is that functional backline. And maybe that's like the deer, where he's done so many reps, he's actually induced the strain over such a long period of time that it's quite prominent. Alternately, maybe he's just really balanced and he understands how to flow and create power on a surface that's slippery.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to mention too. Well, with the figure skaters, since entering the Bill Hartman biomechanics universe about, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago, I don't know exactly when, but something him and then Chris Wycus talk about this as well, where figure skaters have a super narrow rib cage. So for them to spin, do those things, it's so compared to like a refrigerator type shot putter, it's just skeletal from a skeletal perspective. That is a component. And that's where, yeah, just thinking of the complex array of things that this could be. I think to market things, I think the simple is the easy. We need to make things very binary to market a idea. But then, of course, there's more complexity behind it. But with the balance, that's where I wanted to get at. I wanted to ask you this, Mike, because so with I definitely agree with like the fascia, the superficial backline. To me, that makes sense. But all the other lines, like if I was going to say anything about oblique slings or anything like that, personally, I would feel that in a javelin throw. I would feel it throwing maybe light medicine ball, something that's fast and dynamic. Maybe even doing that single leg swipe I was talking about, something that's aerial and there's rotational inertia that's ballistic. But if I just do a single arm cable press in the gym, I don't feel that. And there's something with the velocity, the stretch, the velocity, and the precision. Like those, if you have this triangle of power, I feel like those three things need to be in the window in some way, shape, or form. I use cable presses. I actually use them a lot more than I ever have. And a lot of it's with Bill Hartman's ideas and like kind of repositioning, getting internal rotation, people who don't have internal rotation. I will say if I do a cable chop where I have a bar attached, I feel more, I guess you could say fascial connection, body connection. I feel more closely to what I would feel as throwing or doing those activities. And maybe it's because you just get to connect more. You get to feel more there's just more joints involved in the situation versus like I was doing a exercise this morning. I was just doing and I think I got this idea from Katie St. Clair, who does a lot of really cool biomechanical based exercises. And I had a cable chop bar, and I was just doing like a step through where I would step through and kind of punch on the side I was propelling off of. So if I was pushing off my right leg, I would punch across my body on the right. And with the bar, I could feel some of that connection present. Not as much as if I just sprinted holding a medicine ball, clutching a medicine ball across my chest. But it's something that I would use with a young athlete who lacks some of that body connection. I would use this to improve your movement. But if I just did it with a cable, one arm, I would feel a lot less. And I think it's almost like this progressive drop down of the less full body integration, the less velocity. I just think that we lose some of those pieces. So I was just trying to say, this is where I wanted to get to with this. It was even more than that conceptually. Sorry, I'm all over the place. I really apologize.
You're good.
Because this is where I really feel it. So balance discs. I love Marinovich training system stuff. The Marinoviches were so anti-weightlifting. Like they hated weightlifting. But again, it's funny because I think, like you said, that athlete who comes in and they have the strength and they need the movement, hey, the Marinovich system is going to be your jam. And a lot of it was balance-based, like these balance discs. And I have these red discs that are very challenging from a balance perspective. I've seen very few athletes who can stand on these things well and with control. Very few. For some reason, I'm really good at it, probably beyond the level that's helpful. Like,
yeah.
Like everyone's impressed when I'm standing on these discs, but I'm like this is like I've entered circus land, so just realize this. Like, but what's interesting with discs is it's like either you are balanced or you're not, and that's where I think it's not balance training anymore. Once your foot finds the lock, it's like once you stand on that thing and your foot kind of finds that connection, and that's where I do feel like that fascia, that tensegrity, like that. Hey, I have found floating balance, and there's something that's knitting this whole thing together that found a lock in that joint. And it's also doing it barefoot. Like if I stood on the discs with shoes on, I would be still wobbling around a little bit. Like I would still have a little wobble, but barefoot, I can stand on that and I can load it up. Like I can grab a hammer strength machine and lift a ton of weight and feel it right in my foot too, and the ankle. And that's where I probably feel whatever this thing is that goes beyond just raw strength. I'm like, I think that's some of it. Yeah.
There's some good there's been a couple of good studies in the balance stuff, and the balance stuff has got a bad rap, and I'm by no means an unstable surface person or not.
Yeah.
But I look at it from what it can give us. So there was some stuff done by, I think it's Gruber, who they compared balance disc training to isometric training. So and what they found is the balance disc training for some reason gives you this like early rate of force development adaptation. And it's just a neural adaptation. So you can activate everything much quicker in these kind of 0 to 50 millisecond windows. And so when you compare that to like prolonged isometric training, the isometric training group got stronger. They were like cross-sectional areas and stuff rose, but they didn't improve in the very early 50 millisecond window, but the balance training group did. And so there's value in that unstable surface stuff. And maybe that's coming back to the earlier stuff, is that you just can switch on things quicker. And so there's greater proprioception, and whether that's facilitated through some of the fascial stuff or not, don't know. But probably what is happening there is you got this kind of early RFD thing. And so we sort of like what you just said, there's a ceiling to it, right? Like if you do 10 minutes a day, it probably gives you the same output as doing 2 hours a day. Like, and so we did a whole lot of warm up stuff just standing on balance discs. And that's kind of how we interpreted it, that there's probably a ceiling to the adaptation.
Yeah.
But if you don't do it, you're missing out on that
100%.
0 to 50 millisecond window, which in sport is often half of the contractile window. Like that's half your ground contact time if you're sprinting at max velocity. it's half the time that you're on the ball and shot put when you get the ball in your hand. So why not? Like, what's the harm in doing some single leg Romanian deadlift work on a balance disc?
Yes.
Like, we sort of looked at it that way.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what that study was. I know Eric Cressy had pointed it out, and this is when maybe the Bosu ball was blowing up, and it wasn't the Bosu ball. It was some strength study on some balance disc. And I think the study was about the people didn't get stronger doing that.
Yeah.
I was like, well, no shit. Like, but I mean,
Yeah.
But what my question would more be, well, what about RFD outcomes? And also what I find is with balance type work, especially with the discs, because there's a certain sensation that you grow attuned to, is as soon as I put a certain amount of weight on the disc exercise, you kind of lose something at a certain point. Like if I do a weighted vest, like a 20-pound weighted vest in disc work, it feels good. But if I try to do hold like a U bar, like a deadlift U bar or something, I don't know, that you kind of lose that instant feedback. Whatever's happening on the small level of the foot, that's gone now because you just washed over it with the bigger thing. Funny enough, I know the Marinovich system did this, and I think I've seen it with Sports Science Lab, is they use like those SuperCats type machines with the disc.
Yep.
And that stability of the SuperCat, I feel like lets you dial in on whatever that RFD of the foot is even more, which I think is amazing. And so I've been using that a lot with the hammer strength squat machine of mine. So that I'm like, okay, but if I if I load it too heavy, or if I like lean forward a certain way, I can feel like my back compressing just because of how and where I'm at. And it just gives me a really close sense of what exactly is adapting here. And it used to be thinking, it's funny because people listening to this podcast, a lot of people would say, all right, well, I'm just going to do everything now. I'm just going to do the max weights and the super maxi set and the balance and good, like good that we have all these things. But I just think that it's more like the sequencing. It's like, a movement first approach. How far can we take movement? Especially, wouldn't you want that RFD to be your baseline at the micro level? That should be your first thing. And then once you're good on that, you don't get any more. Okay, now we can build on that with strength. But if you do too much strength, in my experience, just feeling how things change on that little level, you can just wash over it so quick. For what it's worth. I'm really happy you mentioned about the balance. I'd never seen that study. It makes all the sense in the world. And it also makes sense why a lot of elite athletes who are powerful, like LeBron James, the people who see him doing balance stuff, what's he doing? He's giving a bad example to all the young athletes who should be lifting heavy weights and stuff. And I mean, the guy's already got the force production. It probably just feels good. It probably just feels athletic and responsive. And so he just keeps going with it. It's just interesting to see what those athletes are naturally drawn to as well.
Yeah. And what do you got to lose?
Yeah.
And I suppose sort of sitting down here at the bottom of the world, we sort of, we don't see the kind of fads as much. And so we kind of have this ability to look at things like what will it give us? And if the adaptive profile that it exhibits doesn't align with the sport need or the performance need, then we can throw it out. But we've done balance work, we've slacklined, we've done like balance pad work, all the oscillation blades and stuff, because there's adaptive profiles that help with kind of high speed, high rate of force development. And like a simple thing like standing on a balance pad, if that gives you 5-10% more in 50 milliseconds, and you integrate that into some sort of warm-up type movement, like there's no harm in that. There's no and there's a potential return. So why wouldn't we put that in? Is probably our point of view.
Yeah. I remember the first time I did the Marinovich training method, I bought the Probot X book, which was also co-authored by Edith Hoyce, and this was, like 2005, I think I got this, 2004. And it was the year I had just high jumped my personal best. I finally cleared 7 feet or 2 meters 14. And I just wanted to do something else for the summer. And so I was doing like rear foot elevated split squats with my back foot on the ball and, ball against the wall, single leg squats. And I had like gallon water jugs over my head doing it and stuff where I think about the gallon jugs over the head and I'm like, well, that honestly probably mentally made me believe in what was happening more. I don't think it really helped any lines too much or anything, but no heavy weights, just that stuff for maybe 5 weeks or 6 weeks. And it was funny because I remember playing basketball and it was the ease that I would get up and dunk was just insane. Like I was like, I am getting off the ground so easily. And I had the strength power base from the last year, which is great. But from that point on, for a while, I always thought about deloading weeks doing that kind of stuff. Because I'm like, well, wouldn't you want to do your strength and power and then make sure it like is kind of wired into feeling good? It was the best my 22-year-old self could generate, thinking about that. And it's funny because I kind of went away from that for a long time. But I mean, it made sense to me that like you would want to always find some time to kind of wire everything and make sure it's moving well without necessarily going to those higher loads for the purposes. Micah, I wanted to ask you, and maybe this will be the thing we can close out with today. This could be a long conversation. This fascinates me what you're doing. But the tendon stiffness, tell me a little bit about that. Is more stiff, because people talk about, okay, this person's a good horse producer. They jump high, they run fast. They must have really stiff ankles or whatever, knees, hips. A lot of times stiff ankles. Maybe that's for a good reason. What does stiffness mean to you with athleticism, and how do you look at it in light of the connective tissue?
All right. Yeah. So I suppose if we take a little bit more of a mechanical look at it, so stiffness essentially dictates the time window that a force can be absorbed and returned in, and so what we call that in biomechanics is a resonant. And so it's kind of like if you want to understand this and you're at home, like get a rubber band, tie a fork to the end of the rubber band and drop the fork and you'll see it kind of bounce. And then if you add two rubber bands, drop the fork again and you'll see it bounce. And when you add two rubber bands, what you'll see is the displacement that it goes down at decreases and the up and down bounces quicker. And so stiffness changes that resonant. And so if you're stiffer, you return more energy in a shorter displacement. So what stiffness allows you to do, when you look at a muscle and tendon unit, what it needs to be able to do is stretch across the range of motion that the joint is moving through or is wanted to move through, and generate the requisite forces and torques that drive the speeds. So if you're in the Achilles and if you're of a sprinter, let's say, the Achilles needs to be really stiff because you're on the ground a really short amount of time and you need to store and return energy really quickly. If you're at the knee angulates through this really large displacement, and it happens at a relatively elongated sort of oscillation or resonance. So the contact time happens in 100 milliseconds. So if we convert that into a hertz, that's 10 hertz. The knee angulates at around 2 hertz. And so, but it also angulates across this really large displacement. So the vastus lateralis tendon needs to be really compliant. And that allows the knee to angulate through that displacement without the muscle getting to too long a length, which means the muscle can produce a lot of force. And so when you're too compliant, you store and then you return a portion of the energy. And let's take, for example, in a gait cycle, when you're running at 10 meters a second, let's say, you store energy for the first part of the contact, and then you return that energy. Whether you're compliant or stiff, you'll store energy for the first part of that contact. what might happen is you might be already at toe off before you've had a chance to return the energy back into you. If the tendon isn't stiff enough to fit the movement mechanics. And so through the body, there's a need for what you would call segment specific stiffness. So depending on the range of motion that you go through, depending on the time requirements that you have to store and return energy, that will determine how stiff a tissue needs to be. So in a throwing world, like a thrower will be rotating at 11 to 1400 degrees a second that's wrong. It's about 1000 to 1200 degrees a second at the front. And they have about 150 milliseconds to store and return energy into the shot put. So what you see in shot put is when someone gets too stiff, they return energy into the ball too quick, and the ball has a tendency to spit out to the right-hand side of the sector. If the tissue is stiffer than the person is fast. And so when you look at kind of training that, what we're ultimately trying to do is match the stiffness qualities to the movement resonant. So the natural resonant, which is what we call it, or the tendon's ability to kind of bounce with the movement biomechanics, or the loading and unloading windows and movement biomechanics. So yeah, what's the role in performance? Well, you need to match stiffness to movement. And if you make a segment that's meant to be compliant stiff, you'll probably, to a large degree, decrease performance. And if you make someone too compliant when they need to be stiff, you'll decrease performance. So it's about this tuning. And so there's a lot of studies that have shown left to right, or there's a few studies that have shown like if you put the right side through a training intervention and the left side through a training intervention, the stiffness can be different. So you can actually adapt stiffness between segments within someone's body. So if you do some prolonged static stretching, you can make someone more compliant. And if you do some high load eccentrics, isometrics, whatever it is, you can make someone a little bit stiffer. If you can match, and this is what we tried to do in my PhD, is understand the movement mechanics relative to the physiology. If you can match the movement mechanics with the physiology, potentially you can get people to gravitate towards what we call their natural resonant. And if the movement mechanics don't fit the tissue, performance will be worse. And I think we were talking about this the other day around if you measure elite triple jumpers on a pogo, stiffness will be negatively correlated to jump height, because a pogo just it doesn't have the inertia to stretch the tissue for them to kind of bounce off the tendon, so to speak. But in a sedentary person, stiffness will probably correlate to jump height, because they're so compliant that they need a little bit of stiffness to be able to get back off the ground. So it's a really complex puzzle where being stiff is not helpful and being compliant is not helpful, but being as stiff as the movement requires is helpful. And so and that is regionally specific across the body. So there's no be stiff, be compliant. There's match the joint, sort of the joint capacity or the joint resonant to the movement resonant, and you'll probably do really well. And that'll change between the body. So the vastus lateralis tendon of a sprinter is more compliant than untrained people. Yeah. And the Achilles tendon is stiffer. So yeah, it is a very, very complex puzzle, the stiffness compliance argument. And it is a nice halfway house of both throughout the body, not a one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting and complicated situation, to say, okay, you have this athlete. Okay, is your knee stiffness good enough? Is your ankle stiffness? I think it feels like it could get very complicated very quickly, and you wouldn't want to get lost in those. Is there any general guidelines for groups of training? Does it come down to, okay, I have triple jumpers. Maybe do they squat deeper more regularly type thing because of that knee compliance? They're not as good as pogo, that kind of thing. What are some generalities that we could take from that across groups?
Yeah, so it depends on where is the force coming from. So like a high jumper, you jump kind of through the knee, like you plant heel and you jump through the knee, and there'll be a little bit of like there's a lot of stretch and recoil through that VL or the patellar tendon, and a sprinter it's probably more so the Achilles, like you're stretching and recoiling through the Achilles. And so then if you take you need strain to create stiffness and a lack of strain creates compliance, you can direct your strain towards the tissues that probably need to be stiffer. And I suppose one of the caveats there is like, here in New Zealand, rugby players squat a lot, and we love, like around the world, we globally love a good squat, and that creates a lot of strain through the patellar tendon or the vastus lateralis tendon. And so if you have a group of sprinters and they are squatting a lot, maybe you're adding to the stiffness of the vastus lateralis tendon because you're putting strain through that region. And mechanically, that region wants to be more compliant.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And so if you're doing some sort of intervention around the Achilles tendon, where let's say a sprinter, they do hip thrust and calf raises, just for argument's sake. Those two modalities probably match the requirements of sprinting better than a squat.
Yeah.
Let's say, because a squat will put strain through the vastus lateralis tendon, and the Achilles tendon probably doesn't get much strain.
Yeah.
And we need strain to adapt tendon, and we want a stiff Achilles and a compliant knee.
Yeah.
So the generality would be understand what the resonant is, or where the stiffness need is, and put strain through there, and to some degree select exercises that strain the regions you want strained and don't strain the other regions. That's not saying that if you do one set of squats, you're going to become super stiff and you're going to run really slow. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you need strain and you need it specific to the movement resonant. So elite powerlifters, they need to be more compliant because the movement resonant, or the down and up, is really slow, and compliance matches that. So probably do some static stretching around the upper body to maintain some compliance. But if you're a sprinter, and so in a sprint context or a throwing context, the vastus lateralis tendon might need a little bit of like prolonged stretching or some sort of intervention to make it, or keep the compliance while the muscle tissue gets stronger and more powerful.
Got it. So yeah, I guess it's just a balancing act then between what you're doing really on the track dynamically and then how much strain you get through the gym. I was going to ask about deep squatting because, okay, if I have strain, but I'm going through a full range of motion, where does that land? Where does that, with like how, the exact effects, or at least the general effects of how the connective tissue adapts?
Yeah, I suppose I think I'd have to check it back again, but there's some changes in how the aponeurosis adapts, and so if you go really deep, maybe you put some of that kind of like connective tissue at greater length because the muscle's having to go to greater length. That connective tissue links the muscle to the tendon. So maybe that length induces strain in some of the connective tissue structures. But probably whether it's short length or long length, that strain has to go through that patellar tendon in particular. And that might induce stiffness changes. And it seems to be this thing where like plyometrics don't tend to induce as much strain because they're short contacts. But if you do a really high volume of them, they do induce a stiffness change. And so it's probably the same with the squatting stuff. It may be to do with the tendon, it may be less to do with the range. Keith Barr's stuff would suggest some like long length stuff gets the collagen fibers to kind of stretch. So maybe there's some remodeling that happens with deeper ranges of motion. Yeah, I'm unsure. I'd have to go back and read a little bit more around what actually happens there. But it's probably you need strain, whether that's deep or shallow. The long length stuff might change some of the muscle architecture a little bit more than the short length stuff too.
Got it. So if I was gonna look at like let's just say a general athletic body like rugby, not specialized, but assuming they want to be fast, I'm assuming those elements still hold pretty true. Like you still want pretty stiff ankles, maybe not as much as a back sprinter because you have some multi-directional pieces, but I would think you would definitely need compliance in the knees to bend and change direction, maybe even more. Would you say that would a track sprinter be a more extreme example of like stiffness requirement in the feet, ankles, and then I have no idea with compliance on the knees, but any thoughts on training those two archetypes differently, like a generalist versus a specialist?
So I actually work with a young track rugby player here. He's an outside back. He might be one of the quickest in rugby at the moment. And if you probably where my mind is, if you make someone really stiff in the foot, they might blow the turf apart a little bit. Because the turf is so compliant, that sort of fits with a more compliant sort of foot and Achilles complex. So they can kind of dampen the contact, and on contact they don't put a huge hole in the floor, and then they're not like kind of bouncing out of their own hole. And probably more so, I've dealt a lot in beach flags. So beach flag sprinters, and running on sand is the same thing where they kind of grab the sand with their toes, and having a really stiff foot, they almost blow a hole in the sand and expend a lot of energy just putting a hole in the sand instead of going forward. So maybe having that kind of more prolonged, dampened contact is better, which fits with a more compliant foot Achilles complex. But that said, it's probably in a rugby sense, it's slightly less, but we do train him like a track sprinter. So he runs fours, and we sort of think he might not be stiff enough to be really fast. And so we are seeking a little more stiffness with him because we think he might be too compliant. Around the knee, the knee needs to go through such large excursion ranges that we probably always want it somewhat compliant. We don't want too much stiffness there, because then that kind of shank can't tuck up against the hamstring through swing, or through sort of like mid stance of the free knee. So we want those kind of like that compliance about the knee all the time, and the stiffness of the foot and Achilles complex may have to fit with the surface. So if it's really compliant surface, you probably want a more elongated window, but that's probably also going to change some of the mechanics where they're going to push a little bit more. So they're not going to really strike down hard just in front of the center of mass and bounce and return that energy. They're probably going to be slightly more like don't know if have you seen the sort of more the Groucho running?
Oh yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, they're probably going to be more on that where it's an elongated
Yep.
sort of front side and backside mechanic. Um, and that would fit with the surface, and then the
Mm.
qualities of the muscle and tendon would be structured around that.
I love that you mentioned the Groucho run because it was Darian Barr, who's been my mentor in a lot of movement ideology. He introduced me to the squatty run, which I found very effective for a lot of people to improve as a training tool to improve, especially acceleration, because acceleration is a little bit more folded up than top end. But the thing is, I found for me personally, it even helped my top end speed. And it was counterintuitive because it's like, well, I'm supposed to be taller and stiffer. And I have always said, like, I'm not going to try to run squatted down, but it's something about this training tool that's helping me. And I feel my hips and glutes hitting more. But based on what you're saying, it also could be good for knee compliance. Like if I was too stiff from squatting all the time, maybe it's a more high rate compliant because you have to fold more when you run like that. Like you said, there's more front side and there's more back side. So that cycle, the leg has to come through tighter a lot of times. I wonder if that would have something to do with it. It's an interesting thought.
It might do. I know. So Gus has been down the spinal engine route, and maybe some of that Groucho stuff fits with the spinal engine too.
Yeah.
Integrating kind of that oscillation, undulation, rotation to drive some of those mechanics. And he has some really cool stuff on kind of extending the backside mechanic and what that will do to max velocity. And
Yeah.
that stuff's fascinating. So maybe it's partly to do with that as well. And maybe you don't have to be this crazy stiff beast to run like that. Like you can be this kind of compliant. Hey, Gus talks about the Kevin Meyer type running where these really long stride lengths. Yeah.
Yeah. He would be an interesting one if the tendon ultrasounds or whatever, because Kevin has like these huge calves, probably has loads of ankle stiffness that's related, but then maybe he's got that like max ankle stiffness and then a ton of compliance up top. And even like, running with the high backside mechanic, like you're not, air quotes supposed to, it's still a lot of compliance. You're getting that all along the quads and stuff like that and whip. And it's just, to me, it's just putting that whip in the right place. It's being balanced, whatever it is, it's balanced, but it's still whip. And I think of that back to all the way when you just talked about, if you can't rely on just pure muscle, you have to move well. And part of moving well is those like class 3 levers, like the hip, or like, if we're in physiology school, it's like the forearm, and I can't get my arm in the frame, but like the bicep, pulls on the forearm like a class 3 lever. And it's like making those class 3 levers really do their job exceedingly well because they're meant for speed. And to me, that is part of it, is that the way this hip cycles and whips the shin around. It's like constant, like that thing just putting it in the right place.
It's that kind of induced acceleration stuff that you kind of extend the knee from the hip, and that sort of just sequencing things through movement.
Yeah. Hey, last question, really quick. I knew what I was getting into when I asked you about tendons. Here we are, pretty deep into this conversation, but it's great. Just for the sake of time here, finishing up. So what for this like rugby player, just for example, how do you approach squatting, like volumes in light of thinking about the stiffness and compliance, just to finish on that practical note?
Yeah. So we approach a lot of it from this. It's sort of more, what's the physiological driver of performance? And we're actually, myself and Gus have teamed up we'll put together some stuff around how we kind of approach this. The stuff that I was talking about to you last time that was sort of on embargo. And so we probably approach all things, potentially not just squatting, from this. What are the physiological things that we need to drive performance? And then we almost reverse engineer the performance and see where the squatting fits from that. So I've had people in shot put, they've squatted, they've not squatted, we do a range of squatting, eccentric, super maximal eccentrics to banded to all sorts. And it's the modality we use is dependent on the physiological outcome we're after. So a bit like the tendon discussion we were having around strain, there's also the muscular discussion around like, what are we trying to do here in terms of shift fiber type, fascial lengths, etc., to create an entire muscle structure that fits with performance. So yeah, like I've got people that heavy strength train and do your traditional lifting type stuff because they're in slightly slower sports. And I've got people that do super maximal eccentric stuff, and you're talking kind of like 150% of their 1RM, because we're after a little bit more of a fiber type adaptation, and preserving some of those really high speed motor units. And then I've got groups that do the super maximal stuff because we're after the fiber type return, and they supersetted that with some prolonged static stretching because we're after the compliance, the fiber type and compliance. So we're sort of trying to offset the strain with something that induces more compliance in the tendon, and trying to create or tune a musculotendinous unit to produce really high speed through long excursions and these kind of prolonged frequencies. So I probably don't have any really good answer for you there, except we look at it from what's the needed physiological outcome that supports sport performance.
Sure. So yeah, it's not as simple as black and white. There's going to be, and I guess that if just regular deep heavy squatting was, I think it's good, but like if it was the gold standard all the way and it was always 1-to-1 with performance, then we probably know that. Real life is a few more shades of color in there, and how we exactly want to run those adaptations.
And I've got people that I've had so in 2019 I had 2 Olympic shot putters that I was coaching. One back squatted 350, one had never squatted, and both Olympic finalists. Yep. So, but both could produce high speed power, and one got it from like the heavy lifting combined with some of the high speed eccentrics, and one got it from like leg extension, lead curl, hip thrust type work, super maximal eccentrics through those movements. And the old saying is, there's many ways to skin a cat. We look at it much more from what's the physiology you need to do that sport. Because when you fire the little neural signal during the event, it's your brain's not going activate squat. It's going, this is the sequence of musculature, and when the impulse gets there, the state of that muscle determines the outcome.
Yeah. Also the 350 kilograms for all the English or US people tuning in. I'm sure 350 kilograms.
Yeah. Yeah, 350 kilos.
Yeah. Well, I love with the more than one ways to skin a cat. I think it's important for people to see that with elite athletes, especially the spectrum, because a lot of times we just get so idealistic or tribal about, this is the one lift and you have to do this much, or it's this way. And it's always good to see those people who found the different ways that work for their bodies to get the strength they needed. Mike, where can people, is there any place people can learn more about this or what you're up to in terms of research you've done? I know you sent me a paper dissertation. If people want to learn more, where can they go?
Yeah, so there's going to be a couple of routes. So myself and Angus Ross, we're putting together a course on essentially how we have done this stuff for the last few years. Obviously for him it's much longer than me, and so that will be kind of probably, I'm picking where in some shape or form that comes out in some shape or form kind of early next year. I'm on LinkedIn. I think it's Sports Performance NZ, and I'm on Instagram too. I'm getting better. I will start to get better. around posting some of the stuff and some of the stuff that we've done. Or you can just email me and ask anything you like. More than happy to field questions. And I think my email is sportsperformancenz@gmail.com. And yeah, flick me an email, flick me a line, message me on LinkedIn or Instagram, and yeah, I'll get back to you. I'm pretty good with replying. But yeah, there'll be some stuff coming out in an education format about this stuff and going into the depths of physiology, but with also a really practical slant about like how do we actually do this, and a little bit more practically slanted.
Yeah. Well, hey, you New Zealanders being out in nature, I don't blame you for not being on Instagram. I would choose that path. That's an amazing path. So, yes. But if you do decide to post anything, we will all appreciate it, I'm sure. So,
I'll get better at it.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much, Mike. It was great having this conversation. I'm glad we could make it happen.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, it's been good fun.